All right, Alexi, thanks for coming on the pod. Um, Good to chat to you outside of the Instagram DMs for once.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, it's great to have you on, man. You're the first physiotherapist that I've had on the podcast, which is good because I've spent a large part of the podcast ragging on physiotherapy. So it's good to get somebody who knows their shit on.
Yeah, I'll probably rag against them even more. So
Yeah.
not a change of teams that's gonna happen.
Alexi is petting his cat currently as well while he's chatting away, just for you guys who are listening on Spotify. So it kind of looks like a Doctor Evil sort of scenario. Um, so I guess for people who are listening who maybe haven't followed you yet on Instagram, you've posted some really great stuff up on there that's very evidence based and at times is calling out a lot of the misinformation in the industry. Were you always within that evidence based sphere, or did you have to come to it, and what was it that pushed you into that sphere? Was it something you read? Was it somebody you talked to?
I'd say I started my career, and I'm gonna say like my first clinical rotation. I was pretty apathetic because I didn't think I was gonna actually become a physio. I was doing my master's and it was just to finish it to pivot into something different.
Right.
Because I didn't really like a lot of the stuff that was done. But then one of my supervisors showed me like an Adam Meakin's blog, and that was like a snapshot moment. He's a big guy who calls out nonsense and everything. And it was all the doubts that I had against manual therapy were kind of confirmed. So it kind of launched me into there. After that, when I finished my clinical rotations, I felt really hard into McKenzie, like mechanical diagnosis and therapy. I would say it was a good launching pad because I don't agree with most of the things they say now. But the way it was like they were questioning a lot that was done in physio, and they were teaching you to think systematic way, which is really useful. And I still use a lot of which is maybe not for the same reasons they do and not the same way.
Right.
But it launched me in there. And I'd say like when I don't want to say achieve my final form because I want to keep growing, and I don't think I'm not Cell from Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
But I'd say like what really got me into the groove that I'm at right now is that I started reading basically from the McKenzie references, because they do have a lot of references, and it could never answer like the questions that I had and the doubts. And I realized a lot of it where it was based on assumption, and if you prove them wrong, often they didn't hold up. So yeah, it was a big moment where I started really, really overconfident, being like, you don't know McKenzie, that's why you're a stupid therapist. And I was like, well, it's not that great either.
Yeah.
So going from really like a firm believer into someone that's way more skeptical made me like basically, I don't know, but very like I'm skeptical of everything now, including the things that I do on a daily basis. Like I have this law that whenever I hear myself saying, oh, I know that for a fact, I go back and check on PubMed, and often it's like, oh no, I actually don't know that. And then I just learned something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I guess there's always so much changing in terms of our understanding of the human body. It's such a complex biological system, and I usually try to keep things as a coach training people to very base principles when I'm trying to go off things that I feel like I really strongly know. And then a lot of stuff outside of that I know is going to be subject to changing based on new evidence emerging.
Yeah. And it's okay. Like as long as you're willing to adjust to the evidence. Right.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. So that's the
and
big
I,
one. Like that ties into the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is um I actually had followed your page for a little bit before I personally started posting memes. And we've talked about this before, how like you can post really good educational content on Instagram and hope, with the best of intentions, that is going to be enough to combat some of the crazy shit see being put out there. And I know from my own experience, I did that for years and did not really see an awful lot of people's eyeballs being drawn to that and see it have much of an effect at all in terms of getting people to question some of the things they're being fed online. But we both put up stuff that is at times maybe seen as controversial because it is questioning the people specifically who are putting up misinformation online. And I guess the question that I have to pose to you is, do you think it is a professional obligation to call out this misinformation? Because in some ways, like, the algorithm rewards it and nobody else is going to police it. Certainly not Instagram, as we've seen with some of the pages that have flourished on there.
But yeah, it's actually very topical because even today, I was looking at an Eric Kresley post. I don't know if you're familiar with the guy.
Yeah,
like
I
the
am.
tall lifter or whatever.
Yeah.
And one of his posts was literally, I'm not kidding, he was using terms that I cannot even use legally in Canada as a physical therapist. He was saying, he was giving a course along with the Fascia Academy, and I checked, none of them seem to have like a degree that allows them to practice as clinicians. And it was a course on how to diagnose and treat TOS. There was a case like a couple of years ago in Canada where osteopaths, like an osteopathy school, doctors go undercover, like medical doctors go undercover, and they arrested 7 people because they basically admitted a diagnosis. They said, like, your lungs are not, you have like a lung hypermobility or like wrong location or something, and then you need to do these and these and this movement, and I'll give you manual therapy. So they admitted a diagnosis and did a treatment, and they got arrested. The guy got a $370,000 fine, and this guy's online and promoting this to millions of people. And it's like, apparently in the States, it's really oily because you can always deny and say that we're not actually giving a diagnosis, but you can skirt around. So there's a law. And what he's doing is, between you and I, is like, it is illegal. He can't do that. He's practicing like a physical therapist and teaching people to do physical therapy, which he's not qualified to do. And the info he puts out is actually bad.
Yeah.
But there's no way to accept if he does something that really pisses off the authorities, and they're going to invest and do like an undercover sting operation, which honestly, I'm talking about it and it sounds completely ridiculous and like overkill.
Yeah.
There's no way. So, because the law's there, but it's not enforceable in a practical manner. So I think we, as professionals, we do have a responsibility to do it because no one else is going to do it. And also, it's like, when I do my job, most of what I do is, well, I'd say like 50% of what I do is correcting unhelpful beliefs. And the studies show that it comes from the healthcare practitioners most of the time.
Yeah.
So I'm actually doing my job, I'd argue, and I'm doing my job for free, basically.
Yeah. It is crazy. I find the same with coaching people. Like, a large part of my job is having to correct stuff or address things that people have heard that just aren't things worth worrying about. A lot of it is just trying to strip stuff away that they've got weighing them down, that's worrying them, and that actually isn't really something that they need to be thinking and worrying about. And it's crazy that has to take up so much of the time that's being spent working with a professional who should be able to just get straight into helping you.
Yeah. It's almost like, I don't know which scientist it was. It was one of like the most published scientists. And he said that you could summarize nutrition science in like 2 sentences. I think it was like, eat varied food, not too transformed, eat a lot of vegetables, and don't eat too much. Something like that. And he's like, yeah, that's like about 95% of nutritional science. I think you could say the same about fitness and rehab. Like, for fitness, it would be like train hard and often, but have rest days.
Yeah.
That's honestly, it's pretty much. And like, there's all these systems, and I mean, obviously it is helpful at an elite level, but I think sometimes we get caught off in the weeds and forget that for most people, it's even showing up in the gym that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. I know, like, the consistency part of it makes up the 90+% of what I see in terms of the people who I train that get the best results. But just to stay on topic about that, calling people out, and to tie it into a post that you put up today in tandem with, was it functional memology, about the toxic positivity thing? Yeah. So I had thought about this concept long before I ever started posting memes or anything like that, or addressing any of the BS majorly in the industry. And I had never heard the term toxic positivity before, but it actually summarizes it perfectly, because it is this concept that I see on social media that is really prevalent in fitness and in general, of everything just needs to be positive vibes all the time. And if you are addressing an issue that people don't want to hear about because it brings up some of the bad stuff in the world, well, then you're a hater, or you're pessimistic, or you're overly negative.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy to me, because how would things ever get better? How can you know that there is a problem if you're ignoring it exists in the first place? And I think your post was addressing some of these tweets and posts we're starting to see now from big wigs in the fitness space, who are basically saying that if you call out misinformation, you're like a drama queen who's just using conflict as a way of building a following base. And to me, it seems like a scapegoat for them. I've noticed that it's conveniently always people who have been posting misinformation who put those things
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I just hate it. And I think also, like you were talking about the good vibes only. That's actually how I first heard of the term toxic positivity. And
Yeah.
to me, it was always like, what if you go to a funeral? Are you
Yeah.
gonna chastise grandma because she's crying? Makes
It's
no
like
sense. And
the people who go to the Holocaust memorial and get a selfie.
yeah, almost. And
Yeah.
to me, I don't know. I just don't see it that way, because maybe it's because I'm from the scientific area. But even before, I read a lot of Plato as a teenager, and I don't agree with most of what Plato does. But the idea that knowledge is acquired through a healthy debate is, I think, like one of the ideas that resonates the most for me.
Mm.
And just putting yourself above a critique in the name of niceness, I think is stupid.
Yeah.
It's kind of a way of like bubble wrapping your brain in a
Yeah.
world where it needs to get better, and it gets better through challenge. It would be the same as saying, like, don't exercise because you're going to get hurt. It's like, don't exercise your brain, don't question. It's counterproductive to growth. And ironically, I think a lot of people who say that are people who are going to be like growth promoting individuals, are going to be like, oh, like the business guys, or the like, oh, you need to cut out the toxic people in your life. And by
Yeah.
toxic, they mean people who don't like support you 100% of the time when you're being a misogynistic twat.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
we're not objectives, we're our biggest cheerleaders. You sometimes, usually, except like if you're a depressed person, but usually you need people to bounce back and tell you, hey, what you did maybe wasn't the best thing, and that's how you grow and learn.
Yeah.
And also, I think the idea of like always being positive, it works in theory if everyone has good intentions. But I don't remember, I think it's in like war, like it's like an extrapolation of game theory to war, where they're like, you always assume that someone's a rational agent, but the problem is that usually the person that's declaring the war, by the fact that they're declaring the war itself, usually is not a rational agent. So like Putin, you can't use like rational arguments against him, because what he's doing, it makes no sense. It's like the sign of a demented mind. You can't be like, oh, just be positive, just uplift people. It's like, yeah, he's like trying to destroy the planet. And some people, I don't know, I don't want to compare squat to Putin. Obviously, it's not the same scale of devastation. It's not that bad. It's not such a big deal, but it's the same principle where someone's not acting rationally and you tried nicely, it doesn't work. He doesn't care. It's like, might as well attack his character, because he does it all like over and over again. And it's literally his job to promote good information. And he's seen the comments. Like, I know I have like verifiable info that he's seen the comments. Like I've pinned like 300 likes on his own page. And then he likes the comments under it that says like, great job, Aaron. Don't listen to that guy.
Yeah. He'll only reply to the positive ones.
Yeah. And it's funny because I bet he justifies that as I'm doing it for mental health. And I think it's one of the least healthy mental thing ever. Yeah. Don't answer to the people who are very negative and are saying like, hey, I'm going to burn your house, and, saying you're a trash person. But if someone's like just post studies that contradict you and they like have a healthy disagreement, I think they're not a hater. You're just wrong.
Do you think,
or might be wrong?
Do you think it's gone too far now to where if he was to retract so many of his opinions that people would actually stop following him? I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that he's close enough to the mark with a lot of his statements that he could make some small revisions to them that would take away a lot of the kinesiophobia, and he could still be helping people. It's not like Liver King turning around tomorrow and saying, hey, eat some vegetables and you cook your fucking meat,
Veggie King here. No, I agree with you, honestly. And sometimes we joke on the, like with my friends, we're like, he's so close, guys. He's so close. He's like he's edging
Yeah.
us. He's gonna post like a good tweet soon.
He even put up one the other day that was like, oh, it was nearly there. I think it was the one about like
Straight back.
deadlifts. Was it the deadlift one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Functional change it. He just changed 2 letters. Instead of straight back, he changed it to straight bar or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming close. And I'd even say it would be really good for his content, because a lot of people, like if you look at Athlete X, he's running out of content, and that's why he starts putting out bullshit. I think that's the main reason Athlete X started putting out content that's trash, because before it was good, and even sometimes the titles directly contradict each other now.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Like he's just running out of content, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if Squat U were to go like, hey, I've been a little misguided, I'm gonna address this, be really upfront. Like America loves a comeback story. Like they love it. I mean, I don't like, look at where, I don't know. I was going to do a joke about Kim Kardashian, but whatever.
Is she a comeback story?
Yeah, that's a joke. Yeah. She had cum in her back. Yeah, whatever. No, but yeah, I think people would really applaud that. And again, he's not really that far. It's not like he has to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It would be like, hey, learn with me, and he would have so much new content to post, because he'd have to basically review all his old posts. Like the work is done for him. But I think he won't. I don't know if it's from a place of insecurity or if it's just he's comfortable. Like he's probably a millionaire by now. And
you'd have to assume, yeah.
I mean, I hope so. Otherwise he sucks at business.
And it's you can't monetize 2 million people following you on Instagram.
And he's basically monetized this traditional formula. So it must be really easy for him to be like, yeah, fuck it. Like I won't do it.
Yeah, like I'm kind of the belief that, you know, I've seen it with other pages like Knees Over Toes guy, and it seems like I've seen a lot of pages get into that, you know, 100,000 followers mark with pretty decent content. And then it seems like to move beyond that, you need to really start not just watering stuff down, but like outright lying to people, but in a way that's telling them what they want to hear. Because I noticed I had Mark from Certified Personnel Truths on a couple podcasts ago, and you know, we both agreed that when we were in that functional training paradigm, it was a lot easier to get buy-in from people. People immediately thought that you knew your shit if you were telling them that, you know, you've got this asymmetry or this muscle isn't firing properly. And, you know, I've had lots of people come into me for training since I got more into the evidence-based stuff. And they're almost pissed off at me when I'm trying to simplify things or tell them that they don't have stuff wrong with them. So it seems like a lot of these guys are actually telling people what they want to hear, even if it's not what's actually in their best interest.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And again, I think a lot of trainers are doing it like not on purpose. It's just, it works, and they're congratulated with clientele and money to do the wrong thing. Right. Yeah. A lot of my friends critique the Ani Badger project. I don't think it's all bad. I don't know if you're familiar.
No, I'm not.
They're like they market to physios and trainers on how to find your niche. It's like a business coaching page. All right. And I don't think it's ill will, and I think a lot of it is good. Like they're trying to get physios to work for themselves and, you know, monetize. But a lot of on the other hand, like a lot of the advice that they have is basically they say that it's like showing how you're relevant, but it's mostly saying like, hey, you can't do this yourself. You need me. Don't put like, you know what I mean? I find
create a problem for people that only you can solve.
Yeah. And there's some people that do it well that are with them. And there's some that I feel like have taken a turn for the worse, where they're literally saying like, hey, you can't. There was a post that was literally like, hey, you can't do that yourself. I don't know. I take offense to that, because I think I came up with this analogy recently on a podcast where I think physios and coaches are more, they're not like someone who's going to do the thing for you, or they should be like good ones. There should be more like a travel agent where, you know, if you need to do something really hard, like go to North Korea, you probably need a travel agent. Otherwise you're going to get murdered or deported or something. But if you're,
go to North
going
Korea,
to America, yeah. if you're going to America, you don't need to, right? It depends on your goal. And if you're an Indonesian, you don't need an Indonesian tour guide. But they help, like a travel agent. They can help you locate what you need, and then you're like, hey, this is what you do. And if you ever go back, you can go back on your own, or you can, if you liked it, you can come back to the travel agent. But it's like you don't need it for every trip. You don't need it for every purpose. Like a lot of people can train on their own if they have the basis, and usually the trainer can teach them a few lessons. It's just some people, like I have a soccer coach, and I'm like 30. I know how to kick a soccer ball. It helps for motivation. It helps for like, hey, I actually have to show up to practice. Motivation is very important. It's just sometimes I think coaches make themselves needed for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. And it's tough. I think that if somebody wants to be true to being evidence-based and being honest and ethical with people, they need to accept that they're not going to maximize their profits. I think that as long as there's people selling an easier magic bullet, magic beans type solution, that's always going to be an easier avenue, because you've got a bigger audience of people to sell to. Because most people, when they come into either fitness for the first time or they're getting pain somewhere, they want to believe that there is a quick fix solution to it. They want to believe that they can just buy a foam roller and roll on that a couple of times and they're never gonna have any pain again. Or they want to believe that they do like the classic one from years ago was 6-pack shortcuts, like get a 6-pack in, I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever it was he was selling. And I think you just need to accept that, you're not going to be able to compete with those people. But if you're okay with the fact that that means that, you're maybe going to be happier with yourself as a person, then that's okay.
Yeah. And I've made that choice like a long time ago, but it does suck sometimes when you're like, hey, this PT or this trainer is doing bullshit. And
it's like
making 7 figures.
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like you're playing like a game of Monopoly or something like that, where you're trying to do your best to play within the rules, but you can see some guy has all the cards behind his back and is putting some extra little things on the board when you're not looking and stuff like that. So, like, given that we've been talking about all of the issues within the industry, both in MSK and fitness, do you see any kind of a change that could happen in our lifetimes that would really improve the industry for the next generation of people who are going to be consumers or coaches?
I think it could go 3 ways. So so first way would be from the public, so like a bottom up approach, and I think it's going to be a combination of all 3s. But it would be where people just demand that people post their references.
Okay.
Like I had to do it in school. If you went to university, like you can't just post a 1,500 essay, a 1,500 word essay and be like, oh, this is my opinion, by the way, or cite like Wikipedia. You know what I mean? You have to provide references. I think this needs to translate to daily life, not daily life. Like I don't want you to cite studies when you go to the grocery store, but when you're putting up information online, especially if you're a big page,
right? I
think it should be the norm. And if you don't, you should be questioned, like kind of like almost like a new set of ethics and morals. And it sounds like a bit maybe far-fetched or idealistic, but I mean, how long do you think it took for us to do this, like with a little pinky when we're eating in the UK? Like, keeping your pinky up when you're eating took a while, right? Between that and the invention of the fork. But we do it now. Like some people do it now, and there's like, put your elbows on the table.
Yeah.
I think it just needs to be the equivalent, like the ethics of the internet. And the internet's been mainstream for what, like 30 years? I'm fairly confident at some point, if the culture pushes in the right direction, it can become like an expectation. So I think the public needs to ask it and just be skeptical of people who don't provide any evidence. Right. And if people get pissed when you ask for it, they're probably not a good source, in my opinion. Second way would be for that to be just a norm for content creators, right? For like, every time I make a claim, I try to have something to back it up. And I think it's become more, at least in my circle, I think it's become more mainstream because of some of the self-policing and all that stuff. And if I'm seeing, like, I've only had my page for like 6 or 7 months. If I can see an impact, if a lot of people do it, if it snowballs, it can become a movement. Just, I don't know, maybe the way Me Too happened. Like, I don't think Me Too happen in a vacuum. Like if Harvey Weinstein had done what he did to all these women, I think it would have still happened some way, but it was like a kind of a watershed moment. So maybe someone will say something very atrociously wrong, and then maybe a watershed moment will happen, and it's just like, hey, you didn't post any sources. This fucked up thing that happened can happen now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe some quack will kill enough people. Maybe some
That,
people will go on the liver diet and die, and then it's like, hey, you need to cite your sources now.
yeah, that's my
Hopefully not.
personal opinion on what's going to happen. But let me get you had a third one as well, did you?
Yeah, so there's some papers that have been done at MIT regarding how you could curb the algorithm to, kind of prevent misinformation a little bit.
Right.
One of the ways that was explored, and it gets really tricky ethically, but it would be crowdsourcing, like fact checking, basically.
Okay.
So you would info randomly put into the meat grinder, and then people they see that like people as a whole tend to be good at picking up information. It's just the people that are bad tend to overshare it and drive the algorithm crazy. So if you had some people that were like, hey, like obviously this is misinformation, it could probably curb it a little bit. It wouldn't be perfect, but again, there's some tweaks. That's just one example. There's some other studies on how to do it. You could, sorry, you know how when you mentioned COVID, there's like a flag. You could have a flag for this information isn't backed up by any evidence, or maybe they give you a bonus if you have resources like references
Yeah.
listed. There could be like a tab in the algorithm. You know how you can tag people. Maybe you can tag references. I don't know, but there's some things you can do to the algorithm, and that you can test that really easily with, Facebook has a department that's specifically for this, right? Where they can test stuff in a vacuum and see, does this help with the engagement? Is this whatever? How do people react to this? It would be kind of, a lot of things, but I think it could be done at the algorithm level. So basically the bottom up approach, public needs to be asked for more references to algorithm, but, oh, you froze.
Oh, sorry. It looked like you froze for me. I don't know what happened there.
Okay, what part did I freeze at?
You were just talking about if they put in like a new tab where you cite your references.
Yeah. So again, just to sum it up, I think again the algorithm should reward reference posts with good info. They could probably find a way to tweak that a little bit. Obviously, it won't be perfect, and then punish misinformation more severely. Facebook tried to do it, but they were really lenient on how severe they would be, because they saw it would drag down the engagement too much.
Right.
So I think lawmakers need to be more severe against huge corporations that have a disproportionate effect on society. But then again, it also goes back to the public having a bottom-up approach and being more demanding of references and like less rewarding of bad info, and then the content creator taking it up upon themselves to self-police themselves and make sure what they're doing is good by fact checking themselves. That's why I ask people to provide references, right? It's not because I don't think you know what you do. It's kind of like putting your blinker when there's no one. When I'm on an empty road at 3 a.m. when I'm driving, I still put my blinker on, because that way I know I'm not going to forget when I do it in traffic. You know what I mean? And sometimes there's someone, but I didn't see them, but my blinker was on, so they saw me turn. Whereas that would have been an accident. The same way some person can share misinformation without knowing it. They might have good intentions, they just didn't know. And because they checked, they'll know, hey, you know what? I was wrong. And that's happened a couple of times to me. I was doing a random post and I was like, oh, you know what? I was wrong about this. So I didn't post, or I modified my post.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think it's really more important for the really egregious or outlandish claims that are being made, like that account Human Garage, which is probably like the craziest shit I've seen and maybe ever on social media. I don't know if I've ever seen anything as ridiculous as the stuff they're putting up. Like I think if somebody puts up something like a very well understood concept that's been backed up for decades now, like progressive overload or something like that, I don't really feel like a citation is needed for that. But if somebody makes a claim like I can massage the depression out of your body, that requires a citation, so it makes more sense for me for anything that radically goes outside what is known to be pretty well established in like the scientific literature.
You know, these guys need to be taken down specifically. Like I was gonna name them specifically because yeah, it's crazy to me that they could keep growing and not getting reported.
Mm.
Because people are reporting them for misinformation daily and nothing's happening. I don't
Yeah.
know how that's possible.
Well, I think to go back to what you were saying about like the potential ways of improving the industry, to me, I think one of the points that you made there about like social media companies themselves actually getting involved in the process probably seems like the most likely thing that's going to work. But as you were saying, I think unfortunately that's actually not going to happen until something potentially catastrophic happens that really damages their reputation and in turn their profits. Um,
Yeah.
so, like one example that now catastrophic in the sense of like a sporting season, but not to people's health. Was a coach I know who is involved in a strength and conditioning association. They got it to the point where you had to have their accreditation to be able to work with sporting teams. And I was really curious about how that happened because that's just not the case at all over here. Anybody can call themselves a strength and conditioning coach and work with super high level athletes. And he said the way it happened was that some guy was working with a really high level team and was kind of masquerading as like a sports scientist slash performance expert and was giving them a supplement. And I don't know what was in the supplement. I don't know if it had like testosterone in it or what, but whatever was in there, the whole team got popped for doping and they missed the entire season. Obviously, when that
Jesus.
happens, shareholders get really pissed off and say, how in the blue fuck could this have happened? Looked into who the guy was and turned out he had no relevant qualifications and had just blagged his way into the job. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay, that's absolutely crazy. This can never happen again. From now on, you have to have a relevant qualification. I would imagine in the case of, social media and some of the crazy stuff that we're seeing, I don't know if somebody has to die from really bad nutrition information or like there was somebody here in Ireland who punctured somebody's lung by doing needling wrong, and it made the insurance for physios go up drastically if you were using needling as part of your practice because of that.
Jesus.
But yeah, I just feel like something like that is going to have to happen where it's in the financial interest of social media companies to police this stuff.
Yeah. I think so. And I'd be surprised if it happens for the right reasons, right? Cupping is illegal in France, which I'm not a big fan of cupping, but I was looking into why. And
Right.
if you look at the statement, they say it's not supported by the evidence and there's documented risk. It's true. It's like basically you're creating a hickey for something that hasn't shown to consistently beat
Yeah.
placebo. But I looked to it more, and that France has like a big history of Islamophobia.
Right. Yeah.
Do you know who does where cupping is from in France? It's from Islamic people. I don't know if that's the correct term, but like Muslim people, sorry. So it's probably more for anti-Semitic reasons than it is to support the evidence. Like I'm glad that it's not allowed, but it's still problematic in that regard.
Right.
But yeah, and I don't know what it's going to take, because if you look at Facebook, there's literally documentation of them inciting a civil war, and like Mark Zuckerberg knew about it. It was like, oh, what if people were like, you should do this and this to curb it, and he asked like, oh, that's interesting, what's it going to do to the engagement? And they say, oh, it was probably going to hurt it. And he's like, all right, well, keep that in mind. And like a whole civil war, like, yeah, I don't know how many people died, but like it was more than like 10,000, which is pretty fucked up if you think about it. So if that's not going to change, it really would the way I would see it would be like someone very famous and visible actually dying from it. Like I'll give you a bad example, but like if Britney dies from some quack, that could do it. Like white woman, blonde hair, sweet darling, been abused by the system. I wish Britney no harm. Britney, like if that happens,
you're going to be the number one suspect if she gets killed by a dry needling lung cancer tomorrow.
In her sleep.
Yeah. No, she's been through enough.
Yeah, hope not her, but like no one. Hopefully, no one.
Hopefully nobody. Okay, so maybe on to like a more positive spin, hashtag toxic positivity. What would be your biggest area of interest currently in terms of research reading? Is there anywhere like you'd really love to see more research being done in like a topic that looks quite promising? Or
Yeah, sure. The ACL literature has always been one I really like because physios have a direct impact that's very measurable. Like we do have an effect. Like a lot of what physios do can be fluff or not helpful, or people can take care of it on their own. But for ACLs, I think we're extremely relevant. And the research that's been coming out is really interesting on how it heals. So the Philbay 2022 paper, well, like a few months ago, Stephanie Philbay had a paper that showed that I think it was 56% of ACL complete tears regrow on their own. The thing that we don't know, and there's ongoing research by Thomas Cross that's been done on this right now, we don't know like who's going to heal the ligament.
right.
And it makes a major difference because people who don't get the surgery, but whose ligaments heal, do the best.
Right.
People who don't get the surgery and whose ligaments doesn't heal, they do the worst. And then in between, there's the people who get surgery early or late.
Right.
So basically, if we can find out who's going to heal, like what characteristic they need, like maybe it's their age, maybe it's their BMI, maybe it's if they have inflammatory conditions, the type of tear, and also what kind of bracing that we use, because some of the protocols that we use now are like we use a flexible bracing, so bracing that allows you to go like 90 and then you kind of wean in more degrees of freedom. It would be useful because it's, first of all, it's very cost effective to use a brace in the first few days, and as opposed to just getting a surgery.
Yeah.
But it'd be useful to prevent long-term instability. So because recently a friend of mine asked me, they were seeing a physio and the guy said, brace it because we want to prevent long-term instability because you probably have a grade 3 tear. And he asked me, and it was one of the rare instances where I was puzzled because I never heard that. But if we look at the emerging literature on ACLs, it would make sense that bracing could potentially regrowth of the tissue. The truth is we don't know. We know that short-term people do better without a brace. Like the faster you walk them, the less you immobilize, the better they do. But is it at the cost of long-term instability? We honestly, we just don't know that right now. So I would really like more data on this, and other data on like what do you call it, tendon and ligament hypertrophy, because we don't know. We have literally no studies that just looks at people after they're in the puberty and to see if the ligaments actually adapt. We know that the ligaments probably maintain their homeostasis. Like if you train hard, they're gonna kind of rebuild and regrow, kind of like think of it of like a forest in an aquarium. It can't grow past a certain point, right? But it can if you burn some of the trees in the aquarium. It sounds really weird. Like think of it a closed enclosure. It's gonna regrow, so it can't grow bigger, but there can't be more trees if it's saturated. But you can maintain it if you trees, and if you so I think that's my bias right now, but we just need more research to see if we can make that enclosure bigger so that more and more there's more trees in the forest, if that makes sense.
Right.
To make your ligaments bigger. We just don't know, to be honest. We know what happens if you start training really early before puberty, but as adults, we don't know.
Yeah, like I find the ACL tear area quite interesting as well, because it seems to be one area that is a bit of an outlier in terms of from my understanding anyway, how a lot of other injuries happen and how they heal, in the sense that it does seem to be one area, if I'm not mistaken, where asymmetry actually does seem to matter. And movement to a certain degree, like dynamic knee valgus, when the knee is in a more extended position, is a pretty good predictor of ACL tears.
Yeah, valgus is when it caves in. So it's hip adduction, knee abduction, and then hip internal rotation.
Yeah.
The asymmetry is a tricky one. So we used to think it was imbalance between the hamstring and the quads, like one's pulling too far in the front, too much in the back. That's been debunked by a meta-analysis in 2020.
More like the quad strength from left to right.
Yeah. So that's the dominant one we use now. But my bias personally is that it's just a really easy way to measure what your original strength was before the injury. So you didn't get injured because your quad was too strong on one side. It's more that you have a deficit that you're trying to get back to after the injury. So it's not necessarily an imbalance. It's more, I would phrase it more as a weakness. And I think if we go back to when we require more research, we're going to see what we saw for other imbalanced research and see that if you look at body weight to strength to body weight ratio, we're going to see a stronger predictor of injuries.
Right.
Because we used to do that with all muscles. We used to look at abductors versus adductor research, strength, and say like, hey, your abductors are too strong, that's bad. But it's like, no, the abductors are just an indication of your general body weight. And it shows that if we look at, instead of the adductor, we put the body weight, we see a better prediction of injuries. So yeah. I think that's what's going to happen with the asymmetry research. But for now, clinically, it's extremely useful to do that. Like I use it all the time. I have like a machine to check it. But if what I can do, and I'm doing that with a patient right now that I did like a discovery call with, it was one of the rare cases where I could do this. I said, like, you're going to measure before the surgery so we know what your original strength is right now. And we're going to compare.
Right.
Because there is some research that did that. They show better prediction if you know what the actual original strength was rather than the strength after they've been walking on crutches and being deconditioned from their sports.
Yeah.
Because it's a better reflection of what they used to be able to do to move their weight around.
And what about, I saw some of that research that came out a while ago about the genetic influence over ACL injuries as well. It was a twin study that came out, right? Yeah,
I think it came out 2 years ago. It was the Swedish twin registry. So if people don't know, for some reason, Sweden has the largest twin registry on earth. It's been going on for like years. And they saw that ACL tears were 69% genetic if we use the mathematical models that we use to basically determine if something's genetic. So what they do is you look at homozygotic twins. You compare that to heterozygotic twins. So basically identical twins, non-identical twins. And then you compare it to people that are not twins. So like brothers and sisters and random people in the street. And then if you look at like how common they are between the twins versus a random person in the street versus a brother, you can, with simple equations be like, hey, if all twins who have a tear, and then people in the street, there's like a 50% chance that they have a tear, there's a strong chance that it's mostly genetic, and they came out saying that it's probably like around 69% genetic. There's a lot of also, like, I think women are way more, something like 4 to 6 times more at risk of ACL injuries. But there's a lot of reasons behind that. One of them is probably that women tend to train less in terms of strengthening, because they're told that they're going to look manly or bulky. And one of the main predictors of ACL recovery is ACL, like it's quad strength. So if you have small quads, which men tend to have bigger quads, it probably has an impact on it.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll have less access to strength and conditioning as well.
Yeah, it's terrible. You've seen those NCAA pictures, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that didn't really surprise me at all.
It's terrible. At least at McGill, I don't know if we're if it's like that everywhere, but women and men have access to the same facilities, which was cool at the collegiate level. And I think in China, it's interesting. In China, I don't know if you're aware, but one of the reasons their medals went up that much is that they saw that it was cheaper to invest in women because the gap was so, basically they had no funding. So it's like when people donate to universities, a lot of people donate to Harvard and Oxford. The difference is like it's a drop in the water.
They've already got loads coming in.
Yeah. If you give to a small school, you're going to literally change their lives. And that's like when there's a billionaire that did that recently in Canada. And people were wondering why. It's just, you can do the same thing with women. It's easier to bridge the gap between men and women in terms of financing than it is to give a substantial advantage to men who are already overfunded at the professional level in general.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you was about if there is anything you can think of that would be like the biggest thing that you used to hold as a belief that you've changed your mind on recently. I know these things don't always happen, immediately, because, usually more evidence has to come out for us to very slowly do a 180. But can you think of anything like that?
Probably the Impellizzeri papers from 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Ones? The Nordics, but he also did the one that I don't know why I didn't get traction, but before that he published one that was about, it was another critical reappraisal of systematic reviews.
Right.
and it was about load management. So we know that load management is definitely of a risk of injuries if it's done improperly. So like if you overtrain, if there's large spikes in your training, so if you go from one practice to like 10 practices in a week, there's a much higher chance of getting injured than if you build that gradually. Yeah. We know that, and it makes sense, right? If I ask you to run a marathon tomorrow, there's probably a high chance that you're going to get injured if you don't run ever.
Yeah, your tissue needs time to adapt.
Exactly. We don't know if it's probably the tissue. But what impellers already showed, and I'll tell you the prevailing logic before, we used to use this thing called the acute to chronic ratio. It's something that I think it's Bissett and Gabbett came up together in like 2015. They're the big load management guys, and their data does translate, but it's mostly based on elite rugby players. And we see that it's not applicable. So if someone's coming back from an injury, how do you go? Well, the logic first used to be that you don't increase by more than 30% of what you usually do every week over the last month. So let's say if you do 3 practices every week, you can increase by 1. If you increase by like 1 practice, instead of doing like a half practice, your risk of injury at a professional level would be increased substantially. Whereas if you stay under there, there's no real big spike in your injury risk according to that data. Problem is we see that it doesn't really translate to lay people, probably because they're not as close to their genetic potential as elite athletes, possibly because it's hard to multiply like 0 by 1.30 means you can't increase at all. Like, is that what it means?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing nothing, you can't increase anything because it's like an increase by infinity. Same thing for people that are injured. And so that's just from the logical point of view. But what impellers already showed was that even if you look at the data, we know that, again, load management can inform us on who's going to get injured, but modifying it doesn't seem to help for injury reduction. So being like, hey, you're going to keep it at under a 30% increase per week, it doesn't seem to be curbing injury. There's a lot of reason behind that. One of them was a running study that was done recently. And if you look at the conclusion, they say we can't, like, giving a gradual running program doesn't reduce injury risks. And it's true. But if you actually look at the paper, there was 99% of the runners, I'm not exaggerating, that was literally the figure, none of them were adherent to the program. So no one respected what was given. So is it not working because people are not sticking to the program? Is it not working because humans are stochastic and we
So this was a study where they weren't directly supervising people. They just said, go off and do this.
Yeah, they would have like meetings and check back if they kept the program, like basically educational program. I'd say it has like what we would call ecological validity, because usually running coaches is done distance, right? You don't actually run with the guys, except like some types of running clubs. But yeah, and if you look at like the way we encourage people to exercise, we don't seem to be as good as we think, but we can have an impact. Sorry, my cat's in the microphone.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it. We don't know why it's not working necessarily. We just know that right now we can't say conclusively that acting on load management, or at least regulating it very finely, is good. Obviously, if you're injured and I tell my athlete, like, maybe right now that you're hobbling is not the best time to go back to play, yes, we do have an effect. The question is more, the conclusions of Impell's area was more about, can we quantify it in a way that's enactable? I think we can, and that might be a bit weird, but we can qualitatively affect load management, making like yes or no decisions. But being like, hey, we're going to affect your running practice by 0.5%. I don't think we're at that level now, and we need a lot of research. And I think the best way we have is that niggle study. I think it's the Wallen 2020 study, where they saw that if you get a small niggle, like a no time loss injury, so something basically that you tweak and you feel uncomfortable, that week after, there's a big increase in your risk of injury. I think it's 4 to 6 times. So my conclusion for that paper, since the risk of injury kind of goes back to normal after that 1 week, is usually like probably your best guess is to listen to your body. And if you feel like a tweak, maybe it's not the time to PR. Maybe like scale back your weights that day, see how it feels. Maybe if there's inflammation, let it pass. And if it's fine and it's still there after, it's probably not a big deal. And if the pain hasn't improved, maybe consult someone, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And actually, I just something that has occurred to me that I'd be interested to get your perspective on, because it's something that people ask me about a lot, and I know what my kind of strategy with it tends to be. But a big question that gets asked a lot is, when it comes to things like chronic pain, like say
Yeah.
somebody who is running and they get knee pain, or tightness and pain in their calf or whatever. A really common question people will ask is like, when is it safe, or when is it okay to push into that? Or when is that something that I need to actually stop and take a break, or go and do something else, like cycling for a week or something like that? Do you have like a framework that you work through with people to make that decision?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends what they're afraid of. If they're afraid of like an actual injury or breaking tissue, usually the more chronic the pain has been there, the less likely that is.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's some exceptions, but in general, if the tissue heals pretty well, and after that, if it's broken, like you're not making it worse, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
you can't.
Yamamoto did a study on this in 2016, where if you have like tears, if you keep working out or doing heavy labor, it's not a risk factor for progression of the rotator cuff tear. Smoking is. It's like twice. It increases by a factor of 2, but
Wow,
again, heavy labor doesn't.
interesting.
Yeah, but there's a lot of studies on this like that, and if there's 2 studies that have been done on this. One's in Caravaggi in 2006, who showed that basically he took images of people when they were pain-free, like MRIs, right?
Mm.
They were pain-free. They never had low back pain. And then they told them, hey, when you have severe low back pain, walk back in here. And then they took imaging, and it was only in, I think it was in only 4% that there was actual like a difference in the images.
Right, structural changes, like.
Yeah. And we don't even know if that damage is linked to the low back pain, because a lot of changes are asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what that means again is that it's rarely structural. Obviously, if you tore something that if your knee is out, there's probably something. But if the pain has been there for a while, it's unlikely that it's related to the tissue. It's probably more that your nervous system has remained sensitive, and that whatever mechanical change that might have happened, which again is unlikely, is probably more like a risk factor for pain. So it's not that you're making the damage worse. It's more that you're irritating something that's irritable.
Right.
I would compare it to, usually I try to compare, like, for instance, disc changes. I compare it to hypertension. It's not that you have hypertension that you have a heart attack. It's just a little more likely, and exercise is probably going to help with that. It makes it less irritable, it makes you less likely to have a heart attack. So
Yeah.
same thing with the structure of your back, for instance. So it's really case dependent. Usually when people are not sure if it's damage, I tell them to see like a qualified health professional that can help them sort them out. But after that, if it's all they want, sometimes I have patients, I'm like, hey, that's not a big deal. You should probably train within that range, and you're good to go. So that's about the damage, right? It's really important to rule out that someone's damaging something. And sometimes, even if sometimes they're afraid, you can tell them they're fine, and they're not going to believe you. So seeing like someone that's very qualified, even if that they're fine, is helpful. It reassures them.
Do you mean like going away and getting imaging done, or?
Sometimes, but no. I mean, like, if you're a trainer, you want to refer to a physio, or like,
Oh, right. Yeah.
a big wig or something. Sometimes that's all people are going to say. They want to see that specialist. They want to see him, and you're like, okay, just make sure it's one that's not going to nocebo them. After that, if you're talking about pain, because I see most people that have been dealing with chronic pain for a while, they're afraid of having setbacks or flare-ups. Sorry. For them, it's more like, it's quite difficult. I think that's where like physios are kind of helpful, or good chiros or something, or pain informed coaches. It's more that you need to know like what their pain pattern is. So there's some people that they can train as hard as they won't have pain, and the next day they feel terrible.
Yeah.
So you have to be more careful with those. It's like case dependent. There's some people, they have a lot of pain and it goes away immediately and they're fine. Like, they can do whatever. But again, general rule and very, very general rule, because again, it depends case by case, and depends what the person wants and likes. Like, if the person hates any pain, obviously probably training is not going to be super enjoyable.
Yeah.
But if they're like, hey, I have pain and it goes away and they're fine training, that's good. But very general rule, like a 1 or 2 out of 10 in terms of pain that goes away immediately, is extremely safe.
Yeah.
If it lingers, but if it's not there the next day, it's usually fine. But what I tell people is, if it's lingered more than a few minutes after training, you're probably better off taking off days in between loading that zone, if that makes sense. And that's been like, there's been shown to the B. Smith did a meta-analysis in 2015 where it compared pain-free treatment to exercise into pain a little bit. And it showed there's some small advantages in terms of disability in the short term. So what that probably means is that people, but the pain's not that better. So what that probably means is that people, like, they feel better, they feel more empowered, so they do more. And then they have a, their level of pain doesn't change, but they're doing way more. So it's like, hey, I'm going to run my 15K instead of my 5K. I'm going to have the same level of pain, but they know they're not causing any damage, as opposed to the person who's afraid and it's just going to run 5K. And even though they wanted to run that 15K, and they're going to have the same level of pain. So it probably improves the pain as well, just indirectly, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, the process that I usually go through with people is if their pain gets worse after doing an exercise, then I will try to do something like adjust the load, or if that doesn't work, maybe try a different exercise that uses a slightly different range of motion or different muscles or whatever. And then obviously if it gets better, then I see that as kind of like a green light.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, if it stays the same, then usually I say to them that it's kind of up to them, like if you feel like it's a tolerable level of pain, and you're happy to continue, that's fine. But if you feel like it's affecting your life and you want to go see a professional like a physio or whatever, then that's absolutely fine as well.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. That's probably exactly how I would do it if I were a trainer. Yeah, and again, especially since it's past that first week. First week, I tend to be very careful because there are some histological data that suggests, like, for instance, if you have a tendinopathy, one of the theories is that it's a true tendonitis, so real acute inflammation that goes out of control, and then the tendon remains sensitive after. So there's a biological plausibility that going really easy during that week and just staying off is probably helpful. But past that 1 week, usually the inflammation is kind of mostly gone, and it's more like tissue sensitization and then maybe some scar tissue that creates the pain. But so yeah, that first week is the only time I'd be really careful, especially if you're not specifically a physio. But even me, like, again, I tend to be like kind of a really careful that first week. The most I would give is pain-free isometrics. Because again, you want to give the chance to the people, because sometimes people, they get like very acute pain, what we would call tendonitis, and then after they're fine. The inflammation's passed and they kind of weathered the storm. I just don't want to rob them of that chance. I'd rather wait 1 week to start like physio than sacrificing that chance.
Yeah, give it the benefit of the doubt. Cool. Well, I think we've worked through all of the topics that I wanted to talk with you. So, thanks a million for your time. And if people are looking to find out more about you, obviously your physiotherapy services and your content, we know you're on Instagram at No Bullshit Physio. You've got a YouTube channel as well, right?
Yeah, I'm dropping a huge video, hopefully tomorrow. I'll try, but it's a lot of editing. It's like probably going to be 30 minutes, and it reviews all the literature on barefoot running versus running with cushion shoes, and basically forefoot strike versus heel strike. It's what's interesting is that review had not been done. So I realized the last meta-analysis was kind of late, and there's a couple of studies that came out. So basically did a whole review for free, and it's going to be released on YouTube. It is a response to Paul Saladino, the carnivore MD, because he targeted me in a rant. But I will try to have chapters for people who want to skip that, because I get pretty mean and vicious in there.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's a lot of references if you just want the education too.
Great. Twitter, you're on there as well, right?
Yeah, talking to PhDs and getting owned. Yeah.
And what about, if somebody wants to do some physiotherapy with you? Obviously, that'd be online if they're not in Canada.
Yeah, there's a link tree in my bio if they want to contact me. And if they just want a referral, I know a couple of good physios across the world. So if they want someone in person, I can do that too. But yeah, I do it's more like consulting when I do it online. Basically, I tweak people's programs to make sure they can keep training without pain or within a way that's going to fit as rehab. So I call myself like an injury consultant when I do that. I really like doing that with coaches. For physio directly, I do it, but it's only with very select few clients, because honestly, I don't have that much availability right now. But when I do. It needs to be a dedicated patient that fits within what I'm looking for, basically.
All right, cool. All right, well, thanks so much for your time, man. And you're always welcome back on for another chat again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Sil.
All right.